that's a lot of weight for these women to carry when they just found out that they're pregnant and they're already, kind of like, okay, everything's uncertain. And now I have all these people in my ear. So I walked out those shoes and I chose life for my son. And he'll be 17 this month. And funny enough, just a couple nights ago, I posted this on social media. So just really briefly to share, he just got his first 2 D1 football offers from Harvard and Dartmouth. So for anybody who told me that I couldn't do it, I just want to say, screw you, because I did it. But really, that's kind of what really pulled me into this movement. And I had a little bit of a following on social media, probably about like 10,000 followers at the time, and started kind of slowly tiptoeing. I mean, you know how controversial this topic can be to others. I don't think it is controversial to fight for life. I think it's very important. But I started tiptoeing into this issue and kind of sharing a little bit, and I was received well. It was like, oh, you chose life for your baby, yay. And then I was like, I'm pro-life. And then it was like, you're the devil.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you all had a great week. So my guest for this episode of Off Limits Conversations is my friend Christine Yeargin. She's the host of the podcast Speak Out, Christine Yeargin, and she's also the founder of a social media movement that supports vulnerable women in unplanned pregnancies, and that's called Be Their Village. She's also a public speaker and homeschool mom, and one of the best voices out there fighting for life. And we talk about the pro-life movement in Trump's America, the infamous Conservative Dad Bikini poster, and how taking responsibility is the key to making our country better. It's always great talking with Christine. I think you're all going to love her. And if you haven't already, make sure you've subscribed to the show on YouTube or our other social media channels, and leave a 5-star review if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can check out all the links in the description below. And if you want to support the show with some cold hard cash, please subscribe to my Substack, where you can also get access to a ton of exclusive content. So now I've got all the plugs out of the way, time for the main event, my friend Christine Yeargin. Christine, it's been a long time since we've actually spoken in person. I think I was last on your podcast, feels like over a year ago at this point. It's crazy how fast the time flies. Thank you so much for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It has been a while. Also, when we were in Boulder, Colorado, and speaking at a Turning Point USA event there, which always is, super fun, but can get crazy because Boulder is very leftist.
Yeah, that one actually went surprisingly smoothly. I think I just came off an event where I had protesters and people threatening to kill people, all that kind of stuff. So it's always the ones that you think are going to go well that go horrendously badly, and it's the other way around.
Right.
Like you go with your defenses up, and then everyone's just completely chill. So that was a great event. I really enjoyed it.
It was a good time.
So this is how we met. We actually met at this event. I think it was the first time I actually met you in person. I think we'd spoken a little bit on the phone beforehand, but you are a pro-life activist. I think that's the primary role you play. You obviously talk about a lot of other things. You talk about a lot of other issues. But in terms of like the pro-life world, you're certainly one of my favorite people out there speaking about this issue, because I think you do it with honesty and nuance. I think there's a lot of, one of the biggest problems I see with like the pro-life movement in a way is it's almost oversimplified. It's over diluted to just good and bad. Everyone who disagrees with me is evil. And I think the way you've always approached it with such nuance and such compassion, I think is the thing that stood out for me. It was really wonderful. So for those people watching who haven't seen your work yet, I would love just for you to give an introduction into how you entered this space and really what motivates you, because I think it's a wonderful story. I would love everyone to hear it.
Yeah. So, well, when it comes to this issue, it's really easy to kind of get lost in the I'm right, you're wrong. And don't get me wrong, I 100% believe I'm right. All life is inherently valuable. I know that I'm right. However, I also know that the majority, I won't say all because there are some really crazy people, but the majority of people think that they're helping women. They've been so brainwashed by this topic that they think they're helping women when they say that women need abortion, or what if they die? They're getting inundated with the news headlines thinking that women are actually dying. We know that no women have died from pro-life laws, but they don't know that. So I think that a lot of people are coming from a good place, first and foremost, because they think that they're helping. They just don't really know the actual facts. And I think when you start to present them with them, if they're open to it, obviously, some of them are so opposed to anything that happens to land on the right that they won't be open to it. But if they're open to actual conversation, a lot of times they'll say, well, I didn't know that. I had no idea. I just saw the headlines. So I think that approaching it in that way is really important. But also, like, I genuinely do work with a lot of these women. It's not just choose life, that's what's right. I understand how hard it can be. And that's what got me into this movement, is because I was one of these women. I had an unplanned pregnancy. I was 20 years old. I had the father of the baby really overwhelmingly pressured me to have an abortion. My friend said that you can't do it. What are you doing? You're 20, you're you don't have to do this, is what they would tell me. And excuse me, I ended up going to the doctor to confirm pregnancy, and I heard my son's heartbeat, and I said, that's an entire other human being. That's his heartbeat. It's not my life to take. I can't take that. So as soon as I heard the heartbeat, I was like, oh my gosh, like I have to protect this. Kind of my maternal instincts kicked in. And I would say that I was pro-life my whole life without even really knowing what abortion was. However, I feel like it's really easy to say, oh, I would choose life. I would choose life, until you're actually in those shoes. You feel the emotions, you feel the pressure, you have people telling you what to do or what they think is right and how you're ruining your life. And you're never going to make anything of yourself. You're never going to graduate college. You're never going to do X, Y, Z. You can't reach your dreams. That's a lot of weight for these women to carry when they just found out that they're pregnant and they're already, kind of like, okay, everything's uncertain. And now I have all these people in my ear. So I walked out those shoes and I chose life for my son. And he'll be 17 this month. And funny enough, just a couple of nights ago, I posted this on social media. So just really briefly to share, he just got his first 2 D1 football offers from Harvard and Dartmouth. Cool. So for anybody who told me that I couldn't do it, I just want to say, screw you, because I did it. But really, that's kind of what really pulled me into this movement. And I had a little bit of a following on social media, probably about like 10,000 followers at the time, and started kind of slowly tiptoeing. I mean, you know how controversial this topic can be to others. I don't think it is controversial to fight for life. I think it's very important, but I started tiptoeing into this issue and kind of sharing a little bit, and I was received well. It was like, oh, you chose life for your baby. Yay. And then I was like, I'm pro-life. And then it was like, you're the devil. I had worked with a lot of brands as like a mom blogger, influencer kind of thing. Like Tom's Shoes, Costco, Band-Aid, like brands that you've definitely heard of. And I had a group of women message all of these brands and tell them not to work with me anymore because I was hateful. Also because I voted for President Trump, that I was this horrific bigot, monster, what all of the words they use, homophobic, transphobic, all the things. Because mostly I was pro-life and they didn't like that. So I kind of just decided, I was like, you know what, I'm going to dive headfirst in this. Like if this many people are seething and freaking out, then I need to tackle this topic. And there was a lot of people who at that time especially were craving a really bold voice because of all the things that you can talk about in the conservative space. You can talk about taxes, you can talk about the border, you can talk about all of these other things. This one somehow is the most touchy. And, I put it off long enough when I felt God pulling me into this movement. But I was like, you know what, God, you know what you're doing better than I do. So here we are. And I work with women. I partner with pregnancy centers, and we do baby showers for women who are in unplanned pregnancies. And I utilize my followers to help pay for all of the tangible items that they'll need to take a financial weight off their shoulders, because we know that finances are one of the number one reasons that women choose abortion.
I think it's truly wonderful. I'm going to share links to all of that work that you do as well, so other people can help, because I think that's truly the issue. I speak on college campuses about this a lot. It's obviously a little different because I'm a man, and biology is real, and I cannot deliver babies. Newsflash for all the people out there who think they're interchangeable. And so it's always a little different for me talking about it, but it always comes down to, why are people getting abortions? Because I think you get a lot of people who are very angry on college campuses. Quite often, those aren't the people getting abortions. Those are the people who are just really motivated because that's the political issue they're motivated by. It might be Israel the next day. It might be free speech the day after that. And so when you actually speak to people who are getting abortions, I feel like there's a caricature of those people. And of course, there are the batshit, really evil people who treat it like a form of birth control. But for the vast majority of women you actually speak with, it's a horrendous decision that many of them go on to regret. It lives with them forever. There are all these issues and all these mental health issues. And one speech I had in the college campus recently was men's role in this, because you actually look at the data behind a lot of abortions. It's because there's a really crappy man in the background who is pressuring the woman to get an abortion, who isn't providing, who is leaving. And so there's so many layers here that I think what you're doing is so wonderful, in making sure that the compassionate layer is highlighted and forefront and foremost. Because if we actually not solve that problem, because it is still difficult to be a single mother, it is still difficult to go through this on your own. But to have that support and community, I think is what's missing in so many areas of our lives. And I think abortion is really one of the worst symptoms of that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And as someone who was pressured and coerced, by the father, who I will say, in those times, women often are very uncertain. They maybe live with him, maybe it's their husband, maybe it's an affair, who knows what it is, and they're really pressured by these people. And I think that it's really problematic. We need more men like you to speak up. Obviously, I love that you're going to college campuses and telling other men to rise up and be bold on this issue, or just people in general. It doesn't even, everybody needs to speak up on this issue. But as somebody who has been in those shoes, I know exactly what it's like to feel all of those overwhelming pressures. And it's not just this easy, and for some people it is. Some people, have no problem. Like, yes, I'm choosing life no matter what. And then others, may not be as strong. They might be a little bit more sensitive. They might not have as big of a backbone. Maybe they've been completely abused and they don't have any confidence anymore because whoever this guy is abusive to them, is going to kick them out on the streets. So like, these are the reality of the situations. And that's why I love working. Well, I love working with these women because I just love supporting them. And I know what it's like to be in their shoes, but also it brings me back to reality of like, it's not just this choose life, the end, I'm 18 years old. I'm living in somebody's unfinished basement. My parents are in a different state. They won't take me back. And I'm pregnant with twins. I don't know who the dad is. Holy crap. That is a really intense situation. Like, how are we going to handle this? Am I going to take you in? Am I going to help? Like, how do we help her? I mean, one baby is enough. 2 babies? Are you kidding me? So it really kind of brings me back to reality of realizing how difficult some of these situations are. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we know that all life is inherently valuable. So we're going to support them through whatever that situation is.
And it's also the two things can be true at once thing as well. I think quite often we talk about, obviously, life is paramount and every life has value, and unborn life has equal value to post-born life, or whatever you call it. I feel the distinction very strange. It's really just packaging we're talking about. But that doesn't discount the fact that there are also struggles that if you're in an emotional state, or if you're being driven by fear or loneliness or just despair, you're going to make these decisions. But in your experience as well, whenever, again, on college campuses or online, when you actually see the discourse about abortion, it's very much fear-based. It's very much almost like the fear and the evil is reversed, where abortion is the compassionate choice you can make. It's solving poverty, because being dead is way better than being poor, or it's solving potential illness, or it's solving stress and all these kind of things, when really what you're doing is you're killing a human being to achieve these goals. But in your experience, the people who actually are considering this, when they understand that it is a life, does that change? Because in my experience, it does, when people actually walk through that doorway, that logical doorway that I think a lot of people who become pro-life walk through, which is that, this is an actual human life. Of course, human life has value. Again, it's the caricature of the evil people out there who's like, yes, it's a baby and I'll kill it anyway. They are the vast, vast minority. Like, a lot of people, I think, are victims of, I think, the propaganda and the ignorance, the idea that it is just like having a wisdom tooth taken out. It is just like having a lump on your arm taken out, the bundle of cells and all that kind of thing. So in your experience, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do you get people to walk through that door to understand that it is life? Because I feel like in our society, we all understand life has value. So once you walk through that door, you can't really walk back.
Yeah. So a couple of things. There's obviously people, like I mentioned before, if they're willing to talk to you. There's some people who are just so closed off that you're just going to be banging your head against a wall trying to convince them. But there are people who are willing to have a conversation. And I do think that you're right. I've met countless people, especially young people, and I think comprehensive sex ed is a big culprit of this, that are just wholly ignorant about this topic. At 20 weeks, they genuinely think it is a clump of cells. What do you mean you think it's a clump of cells at 20 weeks? Babies at 21 weeks have survived. Like, do they develop in 1 week? I mean, obviously not. So, and I look at them and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I almost feel bad for them. In a way, I'm like, okay, you have a little computer in your hand. You've got this thing, use it, figure out what it is, educate yourself. But at the same time, they've been put through these systems in the school system that doesn't teach them about the value of life, that doesn't teach them basic biology or, gestational ages and what the baby looks like or any of these things. An ultrasound is like demonized in school. God forbid they have a picture of what a baby actually is, but really that is just science, that's education.
Hmm.
And so I think that there's a lot of people who just don't know. And I've talked to some people and said, do you know that, at well, obviously the heartbeat starts at 21 days, and that's always completely shocking to people. And the heartbeat isn't, indicative of something being human or being valuable or whatever, but that is something that people who are on the other side often say, like, oh wow, it starts that early, like I didn't know that it starts that early. Or it has fingers and toes by this point at 7, 8, 9 weeks. You can see little fingers and toes, a belly, arms, all of these things. And just telling them, but it's the reality is that education opens eyes. And we know that because 9 out of 10 women choose life when they see an ultrasound. When women are considering abortion, they see an ultrasound, they end up choosing life. Why? Because they see it, they know, and they're completely informed. Like that's informed consent, right? I mean, aren't we for informed consent in all these other areas? Why are we not for informed consent when it comes to the issue of abortion? Because they don't make money when the woman chooses life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's always the strange thing as well. Whenever people are protesting about hearing a heartbeat or seeing an ultrasound, we live in a world where more information is always good.
Yep.
And it's always a bit of a red flag. If someone is out there who doesn't want you to see actual information, I'm not talking about, blatant untruths or lies online and all that kind of thing, where I think there is a debate over what you should and shouldn't be allowed to see or shouldn't be freely accessible. But when it's just, this is quite literally the scientific image of what is inside you. Now, do you want to make a decision? We do this with every other kind of medical decision. You're not allowed just to go in and not be fully informed of the risks and all of these.
If I'm getting heart surgery or brain surgery, I'm going to ask a hell of a lot of questions. I'm going to be asking these questions. I'm going to say, doctor, how many surgeries have you performed? What does it actually look like? What is the recovery? What is, are there any side effects? Is there XYZ? Can you, you will be informing yourself when you're going under the knife in that way. And abortion procedures are no different. You should be fully informed. Like that is the most pro-woman thing that you could possibly do is inform a woman of A, all of her choices, and B, how to get there. If we actually love women, we're going to support informed consent. We're not going to hide certain choices. I don't know if you saw yesterday, Center for Reproductive Rights was freaking out because the Trump administration was removing some abortion information off of, I don't know which website it was, off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look. And then it had this just like excerpt, this link that said also, how you can like search something and it'll say also and give you some other options. It said also adoption, but it did have information, on the page. It just was a small, tiny link, like also adoption, like seed adoption, which
one
is
of the
like
best
another
things any
option.
human being could do, by the way.
And they were freaking out. Like, God forbid women know that adoption is a choice or that they know that they have other options than abortion. Like, it just is mind-boggling to me and so anti-woman that you would only want women to know about the option of abortion. And that is really like a pro-death mindset in my world, or in my perspective, because you cannot be for any woman or for any life if you are solely wanting them to know only about abortion.
It's so bizarrely just patronizing. I think that's always was so shocking whenever so-called women's issues comes up. And abortion is obviously a women's issue by nature of biology. But whenever the side that always talks about women being better than men in many ways and being the side of women and promoting women and all this kind of nonsense, but when it comes down to it, they are so patronizing. And they look down at women as so incapable of actually understanding the reality of what they're trying to do. It's hard to decide why that is. I think sometimes it's a mixture of just power. I think it's also trying to sell consequence-free sex to people. I'd like to dig into that a little bit too, because I think that's a huge problem in our society.
While you're saying this, I don't mean to interrupt, but while you're saying this, I'm thinking in my head, like that's literally their way of doing everything that they do. Because when it comes to like the issue of race, if you think about it too, Black people are, they can't do anything themselves. They don't know how to get an ID. They don't know how to go vote. They don't know how to do anything. We have to do things for that. Like they just think that everybody is this complete. Well, and if they do think that everybody's so dumb, like then why are we supporting the education system as it is? Like there's something broken if you think that nobody can function or get an ID or go vote or can abstain from sex or can, obviously understand what all of their options are when it comes to the fact of pregnancy. I mean, if you think that people are that dumb, then we really have a big problem in our society.
Yeah, it's like both options are bad. Either they actually think people are dumb, which is pretty worrying, or they don't actually think people are dumb and they're just willing to treat them that way, which is, I'd say, worse, but both are pretty bad. You brought up the issue of education too. I'd love to dive into that a little bit because that's one debate we have I wouldn't say in the pro-life movement, but certainly in the conservative movement, whenever you see it come up online of the idea that sex education should not be taught in schools, it's something that should be purely done at home. My attitude there is similar to the homeschooling issue of I think homeschooling is amazing for some people. It is amazing for people who have the resources and the time and the desire to do so. But the
Yeah.
idea that, all sex education should be left to the home or the religious group or anything, well, what about people who don't have religious groups? What about people who don't have good home environments? What about people who have parents who truly do not care about their children in that way? And there are, unfortunately, many children who live in those environments. And so I think there is a role there. The issue is, how is it done? And how is
Sure.
it done in a way that is not inappropriate or over-sexualized and that kind of thing? So I would love to hear your thoughts on the role of education in preempting this, because I think we always talk about this as if there is zero control over people, zero control over influencing people's decisions, and then suddenly it happens and, we can get abortion, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I think our society will improve once we actually get to the preemptive stage where we're more proactive rather than reactive.
Yeah. Well, sex education right now, as you probably know, is basically the overwhelming majority of it's written by Planned Parenthood. Even if it doesn't have the name Planned Parenthood on it, usually these smaller, because they know that parents' red flags go up when they see the name Planned Parenthood, and they're like, wait, what? Why do we have this in our school? So they have to put it under other names first and foremost. And what it is doing right now is pushing kids to be more sexually active, handing out condoms to 10-year-olds or telling 13-year-olds how to have anal sex or to do all of these other things so you don't get pregnant. And if you do get pregnant, here's abortion. It doesn't tell you any other options. So I am of the mindset that comprehensive sex ed should not be in schools, period, at all, ever. This is the parent's job 100%. And you say, or not you necessarily, but other people say, well, what about the kids who won't learn it? Well, excuse me, they're my children. What if I don't want my children to learn that in the time frame that you want them to learn that? I'm the parent. I am the one who is taking care of them. I am the one who's going to be there for any consequences that come, whether they end up engaging in this or they don't end up engaging in this. I'm the one who picks up the pieces, not the teacher, not the principal. They're not going to be anywhere to be found. I mean, they're going to forget my child's name. So when it comes to that issue, I am fully on board with comprehensive sex ed completely being out of schools. Now, when it comes to basic biology and science, I do think that we can talk about that. We talk about reproduction when it comes to animals or, sea life or all of these other things. When it comes to a lot of these classes, we're dissecting animals. Obviously at certain ages, we know about different body parts and all these things. So I think that it's fully understandable to talk about those things in like a biology class or, talk about them in science. I don't think that we need to be talking about anal sex and oral sex and all of these things with other people's minor children. I think that's perverse. I would question anybody who likes to go in schools and talk to other people's minor children about these things, especially when it comes to elementary age kids and all of these other things. I have a very strong take on that because I have seen it completely abused, especially from the pro-life perspective, because Planned Parenthood really goes in and gets these kids sexually active and have said their goal is to have, by aged, early 20s, girls to have 3 abortions because that's how they profit. So when they have a sexually active society, they have much more young girls coming to them because they have become the sexpert in that child's life.
It's just crazy, isn't it? I think for me, it's the line between what is biological and scientific and what is just the LGBTQ, ABCDEFG, over-sexualized madness that we're seeing being inserted into schools. Yeah. And I think for me, I can understand both
certainly
arguments.
Anal sex, these things, the school should not be talking about that.
No,
that's not, there's science and then you're taking it a little bit too far. You don't talk to 13-year-olds about that, especially somebody else's kids. And half the time parents don't know what goes on in a lot of these comprehensive sex ed classes. And I think that that's very important. They need to be paying attention to what's going on. Can I see the curriculum? Will you show me the curriculum? I know that I think it was just in New Jersey and there have been some other states where they won't let the parents see the comprehensive sex ed curriculum, which is extremely problematic. Pull your kids out of that class 100%. Don't let them go into it. I'd say even pull them out of the school. If they're not willing to let you see what your kids are learning, they don't even need to be at that school.
Well, it's another red flag, isn't it? It's exactly the same as if they don't want you to see information. What are they hiding? It's one thing to be transparent about what you believe, even if what you believe is terrible. But if you're hiding it and refusing to allow parents who should be the primary decision makers.
Now, what are your motivations?
Think for me, though, again, it's about trying to draw that line of, I think if you have loving parents who are engaged in your education, that's obviously wonderful. That's obviously the goal.
Sure.
But then there are also parents who are not engaged in that way. And I think for me, that's an argument for conservatives being more involved in public education rather than just being kind of quite understandably standoffish for their own community, their own children. But I think there is still a role for conservatives, whether it be your local school boards or on a state level. It doesn't have to be federal level.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who will fall victim to the system if they are just abandoned, because those are the people Planned Parenthood are targeting. Those are the people the Democratic Party are targeting. They're not going after the people whose parents, like the warrior mums who are going to come and actually fight for what their children are being exposed to or not exposed to. It's the people who parents don't care, or who are just going to school on their own with no food in their pocket. And I think that's something I think conservatives, again, with the eye to compassion, need to be fighting for more than just our own community, which I know many people are doing, but it's kind of a call to conservatives out there, many of whom don't have children as well. You hear people who don't have children say this, so just homeschool, it's fine. It's like, well, that's a solution on a sort of a micro level. But when we're actually talking about the entire system and how we fix it and how we move in a better direction for the country, we have to be fighting for other people's children too. Otherwise, it's really just a losing battle.
Yeah, no, I agree. But when it comes to these topics, obviously, comprehensive sex ed is not the way to do it. There are ways to do it, and there are ways that we can do it academically, and we can do it well and educate children. And I think that's very fair to say. But I also think that we're in this place because, like you said, a lot of conservatives have been hands off when it comes to school. And I notice, we do have a lot of people who are rising up and who are getting involved a lot more now. But I'll tell you, my kids, when we were in Colorado, we went to a very conservative school. Like, it was marketed essentially. I mean, you can't say conservative school is a charter school. You can't say conservative because it's technically still a public school, but they say they don't do woke indoctrination. They say they support the founding fathers, these things that you're like, okay, those are my people. And a lot of people who were involved in the political space in Colorado, who ran campaigns, who ran for office, who did all of these different things, as conservatives, went to this school. And I'll tell you, we had some really corrupt information or things happening in some of the classrooms, woke indoctrination happening, flipping Antifa style teacher teaching history. And a lot of people would not stand up. It shocked me. I'm like, you're sending your kids to this conservative school. You're helping people run campaigns. You're running for office. You're doing all of these things. But you guys won't fight for your own kids, like right under your nose. Like, what is it worth to win the state or the governor's race or a House race or a Senate race locally if you lose your kid's school at the same time? So I think that while we are seeing a lot of people stand up, we're still seeing a lot of people who are like, oh, gosh, that's a lot of work. And it is. I fought this school with a few other moms about a year solid. I mean, it took it out of me to go to toe to toe with this school and say, like, these things are unacceptable. This is not okay. This headmaster is completely indoctrinating kids, taking kids in a room behind closed doors at 12 years old, saying it's okay if you're gay. This should not be happening. And the kid wasn't even gay, but the principal decided to say this. So anyway, all that to say is, like, conservatives have been completely hands off with education, and that's why we lose so much of the time. They're raising up, little leftist warriors, and we're like, oh, that's a lot of work. I just want to be left alone. Just leave me alone. So I think that there's a lot of ways that we could do better when it comes to education as a whole, which is obviously why I pulled my children out of all of the systems, and I homeschool my two youngest. My older son goes to a private school, but my 5-year-old and 8-year-old are homeschooled.
And I think that's the key to the issue, is the willingness to fight constantly. Because it's one thing to have a fight for a week or two, but we're fighting a side. The left versus right argument in my mind is always the right are fighting to stand still and the left are fighting to pull to the left. And to stand still, you have to pull just as hard as the people are pulling to you to the left. Because if you let down for 30 seconds, a few inches to the left, and you look at that over generations or even more, the country is unrecognizable. So I think we need this relentlessness.
We're already unrecognizable.
Yeah.
I mean, 10, 15 years ago, if you said that, kids are going to be meowing at their teacher or barking at their teacher, there's litter boxes here, or, people think that they can shift their gender to whatever it is or identify any which way, and there's like 5,000 pronouns, you would have looked at me like I was crazy if I told you that. But today, that's like, we're celebrating the fact that people or that there's only two genders. Like, the president signed an executive order saying there's only two genders, and we're celebrating. Like, why do we need an executive order to say that there's two genders? We should know that. Alabama, I live in Alabama now, not in Colorado anymore. They just signed something at the state level acknowledging two genders. I'm like, we're in flippin' Alabama. How? And there's people who are pushing back on it, mind you. And I'm thinking, how did we get here where even in Alabama, there's people who are upset saying that there's male and female?
Yeah.
It's mind boggling to me. But it's because we've
in,
let off of education so much that we're even in the place that we are.
Yeah. I'm almost in two minds of that stuff too, because I think one, it's good that we are standing up for what is true. But I also think sometimes it becomes almost a performance of I am anti this thing, but I'm not getting to the root cause of it, which is the complete control, the leftist control of academia. Because it's one thing to have these events where like, oh, look, I believe men are men and women are women to get clicks on social media. But then we ignore the fact that all of these professors pushing this nonsense, they're still teaching in these schools. We need to be getting to defunding these schools. We need to be getting to actually make it so these people can be fired for the insane stuff they teach.
Absolutely.
At least defunded. And I think that's the problem with me is that, like, yes, it's great we're doing things like executive orders. It's great that all of these local governments are coming in and actually pushing these laws. But it needs to be more than that. It needs to be a cultural change too. And it needs to be an institutional change because eventually Donald Trump will one day not be in office. Hopefully it'll be a Republican who follows him. But if it's not, we're going to see another swing back. So it needs 100%. To be like a cultural fight, not just a box ticking fight.
No, you're so right. Because I mean, it's really not to like compare it to the Maha movement and like the holistic crunchy mom movement that's happening right now. But it's, people are tired of taking their kids to the doctor and not getting to the root cause of the issues that they're having. They're given a prescription and then, told just, go home, take this prescription. And it's basically a Band-Aid. And that's kind of what these executive orders are. As much as I am 100% grateful to, like for the sanity that is returning and all of the things that are on the chopping block right now in Washington, D.C., I am all for it. But again, they're a Band-Aid if we don't get to the root cause. And we have to get to that root cause to be able to actually fix society. And a lot of it comes through education because when these kids are indoctrinated from kindergarten on up, in some places, they're wanting to have universal pre-K and all of these things, they want to get their hands on your kids even earlier. When they're indoctrinated from those young ages on, we're going to be grasping at straws at some point in time. Again, the pendulum will swing the other way because they are continuing to sink their claws into these children and essentially raise up little leftists who will do all of their work for them. They don't even have to do anything anymore because they've just indoctrinated them through the entire 13 years that they've gone through K through 12.
I think that's one thing that's been quite heartening about Donald Trump's second electoral victory as well, is to see the support amongst younger people. It's obviously not as much as the left have support, just because by nature of the fact that younger people tend to be more left-wing, and when they grow up, they return to reality and actually discover what is normal and what is expected and things
wiser.
Like responsibility.
Isn't that interesting?
such a weird coincidence. But I think that's something that is quite heartening. I hope, though, that we maintain conservatism through that. Because I think quite often it's like a chicken and egg situation sometimes where it's like, okay, we want to attract young people. So do we make conservatism more attractive, or do we dilute or edit what conservatism is so that these people are therefore attracted to what we are now? And I think there is a subtle difference there. And I think sometimes I see us doing one, and sometimes I think, by us, I mean the conservative movement, I see us doing another, where it's like embracing people who are in no way conservative just because they're popular, things like that.
Yeah.
I think we could talk about that for hours, but I think that's one of my concerns is like, yes, we need to reach young people, but more than reaching young people, we need to be reaching young people with conservatism. Because if we just get a bunch of young leftist communists to vote for us by pushing out things that are kind of communist, then we're not really fighting for conservatism anymore.
Totally. Well, and the thing is, we know that, again, as people age, they become more conservative, they become wiser. But we also know that conservatives as a whole, when you look at statistics, are happier, they donate more, they have better marriages, all of these things, they adopt more. Like, they have these lives that are so much more beautiful. And leftists typically tend to be, more angry and depressed. There's actual science behind this stuff. I'm not just making it up. I've seen actual, statistics. But all of that to say is we already know that everything that we're doing is right. Why would we shift a little bit to side crazy town to try to attract people in? That doesn't make any sense to me. All we have to do is like look at these people who are happy and smiling. For instance, here's an example, a real world example. If you go to the March for Life, you are going to see families, you're going to see smiling faces, you're going to see children, you're going to see people loving on each other, and loving on women, wanting to help them, giving them the own shirt on their back if they have to. And if you go to a women's march, they called the last one a people's march. They can't even call it a women's march anymore. So don't get me started there. But if you go to a people's march, you're going to see angry people. You're going to see vulgar language. You're going to see nudity. You're going to see people who are barking in your face. You're going to it's so drastically different that I think if you bring the two realities side by side and you show people, look how insane this looks and look how peaceful this is. I think that we already have everything that we need to have. We don't need to shift over to that crazy side. But I do see that there are a lot of conservatives who, somebody spouts a couple conservatives idea and they want to parade them as, a new champion of something. And I'm like, whoa, okay, hold on. Is this the best thing? And I look at it as a perspective of being a parent. Is this someone, for instance, I have no problem saying Andrew Tate is somebody that people have paraded a little bit on the conservative side. I would say it's still kind of fringe to talk about him. I think he is an absolutely horrific human being. Yep. I think he does absolutely horrific things. And I am a mother of a almost 17-year-old child who I don't want him looking up to him. So anybody who's parading Andrew Tate as conservative, he's not. I'm going to tell you, I don't want you around my kid. I don't want you influencing my kid at all. Whatever they're doing for clicks and engagement or anything along those lines, I don't view you as a solid voice anymore because you're doing things solely for your own gain, not actually to influence people properly. And if you have a bunch of young followers, especially young men, shame on you. You shouldn't be doing that. And again, I look at it from a mother's perspective of if we're parading around these people who, again, they spout a couple conservative ideas and all of a sudden they're this new voice of conservatism. I don't know what we're doing.
Or it's even worse, and they're not spouting conservative ideals or views. And because they are popular, we just project them onto them. I think that's something that happens with Andrew Tate all the time, is that he's pretty open about what he believes about religion and the West and women specifically. He's a horrendous, garbage human being. But because he's popular, there's a lot of people who play this game. And I'm often criticized as being pro-cancel culture here. But I actually don't have a problem with people interviewing him because he is, for better or mostly for worse, he is a notable person. He has a large following. And so I think you can't ignore these people. But it's one thing to engage with him and actually call him out on his pro-Islamist, anti-woman garbage and actually hold his feet to the fire. And it's another to massage his feet on your podcast to get clicks that you're going to get because he does have a following. I think that for me is the divide. It's like, for example, when Benny Johnson posted that podcast of him smiling, emulating him with the sunglasses, obviously celebrating the fact he was on his show. And then people were like, well, Piers Morgan had him on his show too. It's like, yeah, but I'm not a fan of Piers Morgan, but Piers Morgan actually asked him questions. Piers Morgan actually pushes back.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's his
so
job.
That's okay. You're allowed to ask terrible people questions, but you're not allowed to I say allowed. You shouldn't be permitted by the conservative movement to remain as a figure of conservatism, of this Christian father or whatever you're presenting yourself to be, and then be buddy-buddy with someone like Andrew Tate. My question always for these people is, if you're a father who is aligning with someone like Andrew Tate, would you let Andrew Tate babysit your young children? Yeah, would you let him date your daughter?
Not even in my allowed in my neighborhood. No, absolutely not. But I think that's a problem. You reference Piers Morgan. I think there's a difference between people who are actually looking at things from a journalistic perspective, and poking and prodding and asking questions and seeing what angle they can take, or playing devil's advocate or whatever, or calling people out and saying, do you still believe this, or do you still think it's okay to groom a 15, 16-year-old girl? Is that still your mindset? Versus people who are influencers and they just make content. I think that they're different and they're not even on the same page, even though they want to think that they're on the same page. And that's not to say that all journalists and media are great, because I think half of them can't do their job for diddly squat anyway. But I do think that, again, when you're looking at things from a content perspective and you only want clicks, engagement, all that kind of stuff, or to be buddies with him. Who knows? I don't know what some of these people think, and that's where I start to grow concerned of do you actually approve of this guy? Do you actually agree with him? Because if that's the case, then I definitely don't want my kids anywhere around your content or any events that you're speaking at or anything along those lines, because this is not okay. And again, like you said, if you have children who need to be babysat, would you allow him to babysit your kids? If your answer is yes, then you are bonkers.
Yeah. I can't think of, there's very few people who are worse than Andrew Tate for like a babysitter out there. It's hard to think of other examples. For me, I think this gets to a root of a problem. I think you used the phrase influencer. And I think for me, that's a problem we're starting to see. It's on the left too, but I'm on the right, so I care more about what our side is doing. And I see it on our side of people who came into it wanting to be famous. They didn't come into it necessarily wanting conservatism to flourish or grow. Like my position is like, this is obviously my full-time job, so I have to do things that make money to fund what I am doing.
Sure.
But there's also things I wouldn't take money to say something I disagree with, because what I believe actually matters. I don't want to promote something or push an idea that I disagree with or I think is damaging to the country or our ideology or my religion or things like that, just to get clicks or just to get money. Because I'm coming into it with the movement and the ideology being the goal. But there are a lot of people who are far more famous than me and far bigger following and all these kind of things, who came in wanting to be famous. Mm-hmm. These people in my mind are usually I used to be a leftist and then I woke up. Yeah. It's like, well, no, you didn't. Because the people who are actually conservative usually have got there after years of thinking and developing and debating with themselves and not arguing with God, but struggling with God and struggling with religion, because there are contradictions, there are complexities. All of these issues are very deep. You can't just watch one video on YouTube and, I'm a conservative now. If you actually truly think that, you haven't thought it through enough. And I think that's a big problem, is that people, not to say this is someone who is bitter that other people are more popular than me, because again, I'm not doing it for clicks, but there are people out there who are elevated, who are quite clearly, I want to say grifters, who are just going along whatever the line is today. And we see it all the time. We see people changing their minds left and right. We see it. It's okay to change your mind, but when you change your mind based on what is profitable, that should be a red flag to people. Yeah. So I think our movement is, to some extent, sorry, I'm going to end my TED talk now. Some people they need to be a bit more critical of the people we lift up. And that includes someone like Andrew Tate.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think for me, in my perspective, I definitely, and I know plenty of influencers, some great and I will rave about, and some that, I pray for them, we'll say. But there's definitely, it's just like any other industry. You're going to find people who are, genuinely good people who want to make a change. And you're going to find people who are in it for themselves, whether that's, in politics or in medical school and, whatever it is. You're always going to find people who are willing to step on other people to, profit themselves or boost themselves. And there are people who genuinely just want to be famous. Maybe they're conservative. Maybe they see that it's, popular to talk about it, especially right now as it's gaining popularity. When it comes to the, I used to be a leftist, now I'm this. I mean, that's a really good engagement thing. And sometimes I'm like, no, you weren't. You just went to college and you didn't know how to stand up for yourself. And then all of a sudden you're out of college and you don't have those same friends. And so you can say something like, stop. But as a whole, I think it's really important for us to take note of those people, and anybody who, whether you're an influencer or not an influencer. I mean, for me specifically, I'm very, very particular about who I will share on my page, because I do have a following of people on social media, especially with being in the pro-life woman, a lot of women, and there's a lot of young women. And I take it very seriously about how I am influencing them. I won't even put a picture of, I'm not a drinker really, but occasionally every few months to 6 months, I might go out and have a steak and a glass of wine or something, but I'm not going to put that on my feed or my stories or anything, a picture with alcohol in it, because I don't want to be the reason I really respect her. She drinks, so I can drink. I actually hate alcohol. It's very rare that I drink. I've got people in my past or in my life that have struggled with it very much so. So it's a big problem for me. And so I think about things like that, and that's not a conservative specific thing necessarily. However, I think that when you see people who care about influencing these people to do what is right, prop them up, engage with their content, share their stuff, do what you can to help them. And then the people who are not doing it, that you can tell that are doing it to be, famous, or maybe they're halfway naked and, saying something about Trump, maybe unfollow them.
Yeah.
You have the power with the unfollow button. You can definitely tell a difference between a lot of people, but it's not just women, it's men too. There's always people who are looking for, the next clickbait, or people who post something that is false. Maybe they want to be the first. That's something like a lot of people want to be the first. And I get it. You announce it. That helps with engagement. You're the first to talk about it. But then it turns out that whatever you posted isn't exactly accurate, or it's false, but they don't take it down because it's a really good engagement booster and it's doing super well. This is an example. I had a friend, she has about 400,000 followers, and there was a picture. I'm not going to share her name, just out of decency. And she posted a picture of a woman with her daughter and a poster board. And what it said, it was in Spanish or something along those lines, but the original photo was in Spanish. But it said something about supporting abortion. I should have been able to choose abortion. Basically, it was a really bad saying that somebody photoshopped onto this poster, saying that she could have killed her daughter, but my daughter's lucky that I do it. Whatever. It was something that was pretty negative, but I knew that that wasn't the original photo. The original photo said something else, and it didn't even have to do with abortion. It was a totally different topic, a totally different kind of protest. And so I messaged her, and it was engagement through the roof because it was enraging. It was clickbait.
Yep.
And I messaged her and I was like, hey, I just want you to know, I think I texted her and said, I just want to let you know that's not actually what that poster says. It's fake. I know that the engagement's doing really well right now, but I also think that you wouldn't want to be spreading misinformation. And the little girl's face wasn't even blurred. I mean, it just was something that was pretty negative. And she took it down. And I think that it took her a minute because, of course, you're like, here's all of these clicks and I'm getting it and the post is doing really well. We all love to see our post doing well, but will you do what's right? And put your engagement aside, put your fame and growth aside for what is right, and take seriously with these people that you're influencing. So I'm totally on board with you that there's two different, well, probably more than two even, but two different kinds of influencers when it comes to this, especially in the right-wing space. And it makes me sad sometimes when I see some of the ones that probably shouldn't be propped up. But I think that we, again, hold the keys to that. And anybody listening, obviously follow the people that are genuinely good people, genuinely trying to influence change hearts and minds, and do things the right way versus, get as many campaigns as possible or invited to as many events as possible.
One thing that you said kind of raised a memory of the Conservative Dad Bikini Calendar.
Oh, yeah. They just came out with another one.
I saw that.
Yeah.
And I remember when this first came out, I'm Jewish, so I'm obviously not Christian by definition. But when I saw that, I'm very friendly with so many Christians and so many genuine Christians whose belief really drives their life. I think it's beyond beautiful when you have something like that is above you, that is not just a shallow belief system. I think it's wonderful. I think more religion in people's lives would be just a better thing generally. And when I saw people ignore that, and when I saw people celebrate it, it was a little confusing to me because I just want to know what our movement stands for. And I think this will eventually direct us back to another thing I want to talk about, which is the role of the pro-life movement within conservatism. But just on the calendar quickly first, I was called, when I said this, maybe it's not good for a conservative dad who is a father to be celebrating what is essentially softcore pornography. And people say, oh, I'm a prude and all these kind of things. Like, I promise you I'm not. I'm just confused as to what our value set is, because people are telling me that American conservatism is Judeo-Christian, but mostly Christian because it's a Christian country, and that is a good thing. It has a set of values where there are things like modesty. There are things like not celebrating overt sexualization. And then we are just essentially celebrating a calendar that's full of just people in bikinis lying on the ground to sell beer.
Yeah. No, I take issue with the calendar 100%. I would take less issue if it said the conservative men calendar. I still wouldn't agree with it by any means, but I would take less issue with that. Marketing it toward dads, especially if you hold a conservative mindset, you are supposed to be married. when you have children. I mean, that's kind of the whole, like, we are pro-nuclear family. So if you're a father, most often you have a wife, whether it's your first wife or second wife, I don't know, but typically you have a wife. If you have a wife, you should not be forget even the kids part at this moment. But if you have a wife, you shouldn't be looking at another woman in that way. Why are we marketing this toward conservative dads who are married? And whether you want to admit it or not, it is like a gateway thing to, oh, she's just in a bikini. Or, oh, what if she's just, I'm going to look at something that's now just topless. Or, oh, whatever. You're looking at Kanye West's wife on the Grammy red carpet the other night, that went viral. And, like these things become normalized. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself watching pornography. And you can call me a prude, you can call me whatever you want, but that is reality. That is facts. When you have children, say it's a dad who has a little boy and he comes in and, there's these essentially halfway naked people in like these little skimpy outfits, and not even just in the skimpy outfits. Like if they're surfing, okay, you're in a bikini surfing, whatever. But they're posing seductively most often. And that is the problem, is because they're trying to, it's essentially seductive poses to entice men to do something that we know they shouldn't be doing in the first place. So I do take massive issue with the fact that they're marketed toward dads. If my husband came home with one of those things, are you kidding me? He'd be sleeping at a hotel that night or something. Like, no chance would that fly in this household. But he would never do that, because he would never disrespect me in that way. He wouldn't bring that into our home. He wouldn't let our daughters see that, because at the end of the day, those are somebody else's daughters too. And potentially somebody's mom. I don't know who all the girls are this time. I hadn't heard of anybody, but last time too, like, these are, and I do know that one of the women last time did express some regret for being on the calendar, which I do appreciate. But I don't think that it should have come, because you got a bunch of backlash for doing something. Had you gotten praise, would you be regretting it as much? I don't know. I hope so. But I think at the end of the day, this should be, we shouldn't even have this as conservatives as a whole. But also, if you're marketing toward dads, that's extremely problematic.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to it. It's gross. I think gross. It's grifting. It's inappropriate. I also think it's disrespectful to.
They also do beer too. It's halfway naked women, and beer is a lifestyle they're promoting. Like, it's kind of a gross lifestyle when you think about it, anyway.
I also think the thing that upset me most is I remember Riley Gaines was like the central figure. Riley Gaines is, spectacularly famous. She's very popular. She's done some fantastic things on the issue of gender and sport. And I commend her for those things 100%. Not going to criticize her on any of those issues. But she also promotes herself as a deeply religious Christian wife. And I think, again, for me, it was like, okay, just people need to pick a lane. Like, if you want to pose half naked on a calendar to sell beer, that's your choice. Like, I think it's wrong who it's marketed to, but if you want to do that, fine. But don't also sell your image as a religious wife, because I'm Jewish. There is a 0% chance my wife is going on one of those calendars.
Right.
Not just because I wouldn't be okay with it, because she respects me and I respect her, and you respect your body and all these kind of things. But it's one thing to do that or not do that. It's another to try and ride, two ponies with one ass, essentially, which is I'm deeply frugal, but also not.
Yeah. And I don't know Riley. I do know that, obviously she's probably more comfortable in a swimsuit than not in a swimsuit, because she was a swimmer.
She wasn't swimming races in those bikinis, though.
No. I know. But I know that she also has expressed, she's one of the people I believe that has expressed some regret for being in that calendar. So again, did that come by backlash? I don't know. Did it come by like, I shouldn't have done that, I didn't realize it was going to be marketed toward dads, or I wasn't told, I don't know exactly what she was or wasn't told. But I think that, if she is expressing regret, I think that's good. And I think that gives her time to talk. But I do agree. I mean, there are definitely people that I see, seductively in a bikini and posting a Bible verse. And I'm like, what are you doing? No, Bible verses and bikinis don't go together. Again, like if you're on a surfboard in the ocean, like, an action shot, to me, that's totally different than, seductively with the waves all on you or something like that. Two totally different situations. And I think that obviously we need to be supporting the people who are not bikini and a Bible verse.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can unfollow them or like tell them that this content is uncomfortable or it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that we should be doing. A lot of people, especially if they're in it for fame or they're in it for clicks and engagement, they're going to do what gets clicks and engagement. So really the followers hold a lot of power for the people who don't have like really intense convictions. If I have 10 million people tell me that pro-choice is the way, obviously I'm not going to change my mind on that.
Yeah.
However, for a lot of these people, when it comes to engagement and wanting to be famous, the followers hold a lot of power, and they can tell them, I'm not going to stand for this content and I'm going to unfollow you if you keep posting this kind of stuff. And I think that they need to realize it's just like the American people. The louder we get, a lot of times, even, you see like a lot of people have raised a fuss about different things, and Donald Trump maybe changes his mind on something. And the life issue was one of them when it came to the amendment in Florida that happened. But we do hold the power. And I think that we can call people to be better than what they're being.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that, like the pro-life role in the election specifically, because I think it's too early in Trump's term to really know where this administration is going. I'm obviously very hopeful. It was a very pro-life first administration. But I think the election and the campaign was interesting because I think you saw much more of a populist momentum shift where pro-lifers were kind of told to basically take a step back. And when Donald Trump came out a few times and said things that were either on the edge or were pretty much, anti-pro-life, I don't really ever I try not to say the phrase pro-choice because I think that itself is propaganda. And I know a lot of pro-lifers out there were told just to basically sit down and shut up because we need to win the election. I understand that as a pragmatic argument, but also for people who are pro-life, and that is their one key view or the primary view, you don't really sit down and shut up when babies are being murdered in the womb. And so I would just love to hear your thoughts firstly on that time, because I don't think we've had a chance to speak about that. But also what you think this means for conservatism, of whether this is a fork in the road, or you think that's just like the matter of politics for the election and it will be okay.
I'm hopeful as well. And I'm not totally sure. I do think that President Trump didn't have the best people around him for a little while. Obviously, he was proud of being the most pro-life president in history last time. And what made that shift? Who was influencing him in that way to make him think that he needed to make that shift? Obviously, he's got probably hundreds of people surrounding him, all of them with different ideas. Some are going to be more pro-life, some are going to be less pro-life. But, he came out and said that he was going to vote. It's been a little while. So he was going to vote yes on Amendment 4, I think is what it was, because he didn't agree with it. And then he came out again later and said no. Or maybe he didn't say he was going to vote yes. He said that, he thought 15 weeks. What was it, a 15-week ban?
I can't remember quite the language, but he was essentially in favor of the leftist proposition that we should just have all allowed for no reason.
And I either think that he wasn't fully informed on exactly what he was talking about, and he just said something, or he had people who were thinking about things from a different perspective. And I think that they think that they have to stray away from pro-life views because they're unpopular instead of educate people. It is. J.D. Vance did phenomenal when he said that, they're for abortion up until birth. Why aren't we he could have done better in the vice presidential debate, but he said a lot of things that were really great. And you can use this opportunity to educate people and say, abortion up until birth is not okay. Yeah. Period. These are there are babies genuinely, and then have the facts to support you. In Tim Walz's state, Governor Tim Walz's state, they had 5 babies who were born alive after failed abortion. Do we really want that in our country? And show them. It's on their health website. Like you can go look it up. Their .gov website shows that. And in order to prevent that from getting out, they removed reporting about babies who are born alive from failed abortions. So to me, it makes sense, even if it's wildly unpopular, put that back on them and be like, you want babies to be born alive from failed abortions and just left to die? Are you kidding me? Show them how crazy that they are. But I think that there are a lot of people behind the scenes. There are a couple who are very notable that anybody who's conservative would recognize their name that I do know are pushing him really hard on this issue and talking to him about being more pro-life. And that's a lot of where you saw his mind change when it came to Amendment 4. I think he is I do genuinely think he has a heart for children and babies.
I
I
agree.
really do. I think that he's got some bad players around him, or has had. I don't know if they're still around him, or who is around him, or who isn't, advising him on this specific topic. But I think that we've seen a lot of pro-life things already that he's done. Acknowledging two genders, in which it also talks about life beginning at conception, so to speak. Taking down the Biden administration pro-abortion website, gone. Like, that doesn't exist anymore. Putting the C, also adoption, and removing reproductive health care, basically abortion stuff, off of government websites. Trying to think of other things he's done at the moment. They've talked about defunding Planned Parenthood. I mean, if we see those things, he will continue that legacy of being the most pro-life president. Here's my deal. If he's personally pro-life or not personally pro-life, obviously I care. I want him to be pro-life. I wholeheartedly want him to be pro-life. If he's not pro-life, but he's signing pro-life legislation, heck yeah. Like, I'm going to champion you. Like, if you're doing that, taking down the pro-abortion website, and you're doing these things, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, then I'm still here for it, because ultimately the country's a better place because of it. So I do think that we have more to see. It is very early in the administration. I am very hopeful and optimistic that he will continue his reputation as the most pro-life president in history. I do think that there are some intersecting ways that the pro-life movement can join with what's happening today, especially as it comes to the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. People don't know that birth control as well, but abortion pills, when these women take these abortion pills and then they're told to flush everything that comes out, which is essentially the baby. And if you pick it up, you'll actually see a baby within a sac, but they're told to flush it. So and whether you flush that or not, anyway, they flush it. All of this stuff is going into our water system. And if you get water, and this is from an environmental perspective that can obviously go hand in hand with the MAHA stuff, chemical abortion pills, we're drinking them, whether we want to admit it or not. If we're not filtering our water, it is in our tap water. Pharmaceuticals, drugs, all sorts of stuff, chemicals, fertilizers, all this stuff is in our tap water, and we're drinking it on a day-to-day basis. And we have a lot of women who can't get pregnant. I wonder why. We can obviously go into the food stuff and what's sprayed on our food and all these other things, and people don't take care of their health sometimes, maybe. But is there a connection to that? Why are we drinking water that has chemical abortion pills? We should be taking this more seriously. We need to be talking about this. So there are different ways that I think, especially, that we can be approaching this, and different tactics. And I know abolitionists have, obviously a wildly different perspective. They're not for incrementalism in any way, shape, or form. However, I will say that, there are all sorts of ways that we can tackle this in 2025 that we didn't talk about before in 2016 when he won last time. So I do think that we'll see more pro-life stuff. I think he's got some good people around him right now. There's a couple there's one specifically that I'm thinking of that I know for sure is on this pro-life train and influencing him in that way. So I think we'll see more of it. And I think we'll be pleasantly surprised. I'm optimistically hopeful, but again, it is politics. So
anything can happen.
I think you can only wait at this point. Wait and see. We're just and pressure. Spectators. I mean, I know when they see things erupt on social media, like his team takes note of it. And we'll take it back to him. It's everyone is upset about XYZ. I know Paula White was just the faith office, like, nominated to the faith office, or he just started something new, and a lot of Christians are upset about Paula White being that person. And I'm pretty sure that his team has heard about that. And if it changes or not, I don't know, but I know that we can make a respectful ruckus, like Allie Beth Stuckey says, and we can influence change if we want to.
And I think it's our duty to as well, because
absolutely
these people work for us. Like, Donald Trump is a politician. And I think this is my concern sometimes with people who are all too happy just to switch to whatever he thinks in the moment. I think my view with Trump should be what everyone's view is he does many great things and we should praise him for it. And when he does something that's bad or hints at doing something bad, I think we should push back, because he works for us. It's like a very weird switch where it's almost like a monarchy system where anything he says is good. It's like, no, he's a person. And I think his journey on the pro-life stuff has been really interesting. I think for me as a man, he reminds me of a lot of men who haven't really ever thought about abortion until it's raised to them.
Some of it,
where it's like, I think he was pro-abortion for a lot of his life. He probably I wouldn't be surprised if he's paid for an abortion in his life, or has at least openly supported abortion. But I think once he entered this political space and for the first time was speaking with people who were pro-life, I think his experience was my experience in that way of, oh, of course this is life. I
Yeah.
think there are a lot of men who are out there because they can't get pregnant because if they're not going around knocking women up left, right, and center, this just isn't an issue that comes up. But I think the first time
Mhm.
it comes up, it is truly like a light bulb being turned on of like, oh, this is just legally
Well, you're
sanctioned
forced
murder
to
that's
think
going on.
about it
Yes.
more, right? Like before, you can just go your day-to-day life. If you're not in an unplanned pregnancy or don't have a child in an unplanned pregnancy or haven't gotten somebody
Mm-hmm.
pregnant or something, then you're not necessarily really thinking about it. And I think even sometimes people who have gotten other people pregnant, they don't really know what they're doing. Or like, just
Mm-hmm.
take care of it.
Yeah.
Again, it ties back into that education piece. But when it comes to politics and you're like, oh wow, this is a topic that people are going to care about, I actually have to think about it. and
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know who is his right hand person or who's telling him, educating him on this topic as a whole. I don't know if he has a specific pro life advisor. I hope that he does. But he's definitely forced to think about it more and look into it
Mm-hmm.
more and, be educated on it more than he ever was before. So I think that that is something, and it can, same with RFK. I mean, I'm hopeful that he makes changes as well. I know that he definitely was pro abortion and he was wishy washy on his stance as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I am hopeful that their eyes can be open because, again, just like it takes with an ultrasound and a woman who's in an unplanned pregnancy, when she sees that ultrasound, 9 times out of 10, even if she was going to choose abortion before, she chooses life. So I do think
Mm-hmm.
that people's hearts and minds can be changed when it comes to education. And I'm hopeful that that's the case when it comes to anybody that we have as an elected official, honestly.
I mean, for those who have been following me on social media, I'm not a fan of RFK Jr. I think
Sure.
mainly for his history, but I think I share your hope. I
Yeah.
think two things can be true at once, where you don't like someone's previous views, but you hope the best for them if they are confirmed or they are president. And I was surprised by Donald Trump, so here's praying that I'm wrong about RFK. I would never be happier to be wrong in my life. Um, I know we're coming up to the end of the time you have, and I don't want to keep you on here too long. So one last thing I wanted to ask before we wrap things up was something I try and speak about whenever abortion comes up is the issue of responsibility. And
Yeah.
I think responsibility is or the lack of responsibility is at the center of basically every cultural problem we have. Um, as a mother and an activist in this area, what advice do you have for people who want to not only take more responsibility in their lives, but encourage the people around them to take more responsibility? Because that's a question I always face. It's very easy for me personally to take responsibility. But when I'm trying to reach other people, how have you found success reaching those people and opening their eyes to the fact that if you take responsibility in your life, it might be harder, but it will be better?
Sure. When it comes to the life issue, you mean?
Life issue or really any issue, but I think life is the ultimate symptom of this.
Right. Well, first and foremost, when you take responsibility and you take accountability, life ends up being easier in the long run. I
Mm-hmm.
think when you don't take responsibility or when you slack off or when you make poor choices, ultimately you're constantly playing catch up. You're constantly trying to get back to a decent place. Whether it is, very basic, if you're talking about whether it's in the gym, if you're not you know, being disciplined and being responsible and making the right choices for your life. Like, I want to go to the gym, but I'm going to be irresponsible. I'm going to stay up all night on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to eat really crappy. And then I'm going to feel really bad. I'm not going to go to the gym. And then you're constantly playing catch up versus I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to go to bed at a decent hour. I'm going to put my phone over here so that I'm not tempted to touch it. And this is a very just basic example, but I do think that we make our lives easier by being responsible in the long run. Maybe it is harder in that moment to put your phone down when it's very addicting to have it. You have
Mm-hmm.
every reason to be on it because they make them so that they are addicting. And then, obviously unhealthy food tasted a lot better, not always. It can be addicting depending on
Mm-hmm.
what they put in it because they want to make it addicting.
Yes.
They want you to keep buying it. So you're doing all of these things, but because they feel better. However, they make your life harder in the long run. So I think it's really important to realize and witness that all of these things by being responsible, especially with my son, when it comes to getting in college right now. Here's another example. He's done all of the hard things, whether it comes to being responsible in his academic life or his athletic life. And now he's got colleges, knocking on his door. And I had the head coach of Harvard text me this morning, asking about him. Now we won't go into how woke Harvard is right now, but, because of all the decisions he made it over the years a long way, going to college is going to be easier now. He's put in the work, he's made the grades, he's done all of these things. He's got an athletic option and he's got an academic option to be able to go do things. So I think realizing, and it's just the right thing to do, to be responsible, to be accountable when it comes to, especially our values, when it comes to the life issue. Obviously we shouldn't be having premarital sex. Obviously, if we do find ourselves in those shoes and we find ourselves pregnant, is having a baby going to be difficult? Sure. But it's also difficult when you're married. I mean, it's not easy. You're waking up in the middle of the night. You're feeding the baby. I mean, there's definitely hard things about all of these things, but there's also a right and wrong. And you will feel better about yourself. You will feel better about your future. And you will feel better about the legacy that you leave behind, knowing that you've always done the right thing and you've been responsible. You've been accountable for all of the decisions that you've made. And it will make things easier in the long run, for sure. Especially, when it comes to the issue of abortion. Had I chose abortion, I know for certain, but I know there are a lot of women, when they choose abortion, they experience regret for the rest of their life. And that's painful. Do you want to live with that for the rest of your life? So sure, there's the hard routes, but oftentimes hard is not the same thing as bad. Actually, it's funny. I'm going to show you something really quick. A friend of mine has a book. And she literally, it was packaged in this. Hard is not the same thing as bad. And I think we need to realize that when it comes to being responsible and making some decisions that are a lot harder, it will make things easier in the long run. And it's just oftentimes the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully said. And I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for joining me. It's an absolute pleasure. You need to come back. I feel like there's so much stuff we still have to talk about.
Are you in Nashville now, right?
I am in Nashville.
Okay.
So you're not too far.
I'll let you know next time in Nashville.
Yeah, and I'll let you know next time I come down to Alabama. There's actually one of my favorite food places, a place we stopped on the side of the road. I can't remember the name. I can remember vaguely where it is. I need to find where it is so I can tell everyone about it.
That's hilarious. But, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure.